going to be in general on alliance building, coalition building, membership building, how to use our community resources as efficiently as possible. And we're very fortunate to have Bob Bussel be our presenter tonight. He's the director of the Labor Education and Research Center at the U of O, which basically is a national resource for union and labor movements and organizers around the country. So we kind of have a brain surgeon to trim our toenails, so to speak, tonight. And a lot of his presentation is going to be participatory for us to kind of start putting together our own thoughts about our own alliances and things like that. Just a reminder, because Mary will spank me if I don't say this, donations are warmly accepted for this series. Hopefully folks have been checking the syllabus. You might have seen that there was an article or what was it, a journal?
It was posted on a blog. Okay,
so there's a blog piece posted at the syllabus for tonight, just to kind of file away in your toolbox. You know, we're trying to put together resources and things for people to have in their future community organizing efforts. So hopefully you saw that and that's available to you. Next week, April 11th, will be our action planning training session. Kim Marks, who's a longtime organizer out of Portland, who organizes with Rising Tide, Forest Ethics, and a number of other organizations, is going to come down and give us the nuts and bolts on how to plan an action and what should be encompassed when planning protests and whatnot. And that's next week. So hopefully you all will be back again for that one. And without further ado, I will turn it over to Bob.
Well, thanks very much, Lauren. It's really great to be here with you all tonight. And first, let me just start off by saying how much I really admire and appreciate the work of Occupation Eugene and Occupy more generally. And I sometimes tend to think in alliteration. So what I think of when I think of you guys is I really especially appreciate your courage, your commitment, and the fact that you've been able both to challenge and I think in some measure change the existing narrative about what ails our society. And those are certainly very large achievements right there. So I just want to say how much I've appreciated what you've all done already in that regard. I think the relevant experience I bring to the table tonight, so let me just talk briefly about that, and then I'll just give you an overview of what I'd like to propose to do with you all. I've been a social and political activist for, 40 years. Makes me pretty damn old. But, you know, I got my start in the anti-Vietnam War movement back in the late 60s and early 70s. But I think the most relevant parts of my experience for this is that I really cut my political teeth working with the United Farm Workers Union and Cesar Chavez in the early 1970s on the really, it was an amazing social movement. I don't think the farm workers often, you know, if you think about the 1960s, people will think about rightfully so, the civil rights movement, the women's movement, gay rights movement, student movement. But the farm workers really should be right up there in terms of the number of people that they reach. I see some people nodding. Maybe some of you didn't eat grapes or lettuce when you were younger folks or whatever, or lost your taste for them. Those were labor community efforts. Those were broadly based alliances, and that's what I was weaned and cut my teeth on in the union movement. The other thing that I was involved in after that, I worked for 10 years for a union that was then known as the Amalgamated Clothing and Textile Workers. And for a while, when I listed my profession, I would say professional boycotter, because that's what I did for the first 10 years of my career. So we had a national boycott of a company called J.P. Stevens. And J.P. Stevens, which, have you ever seen the movie Norma Ray? Yeah. Norma Ray was based on the J.P. Stevens company, and they were kind of the Walmart of their day. They were an enormous textile company that had moved down south. They were known as the leading scofflaw in terms of labor law, and we were able in some measure to bring them to justice again after a broadly based labor community effort that lasted for 5 years. And even in my organizing work as a union organizer, I currently am doing some work around immigration in Eugene and Springfield. I've just always felt it was really critical to be working in broadly based alliances with other folks. So that's the experience I bring to the table, and what I'd like to do tonight in terms of an agenda is to first talk about the rationale for doing this. Why should we think about or really do labor community alliances? Second is to then walk through a kind of community mapping with you. What existing relationships do you already have that might be useful to you in this type of activity? And then to really get very practical about it in terms of selecting and choosing allies. All allies are not equal. You know, there's a lot of people out there you can align yourself with. What are the criteria by which you make those choices? And then finally, to talk about how you actually make this sort of appeal. You know, what do you do when you actually go out and begin to talk to people? How do you think about common ground, common interest, tailoring your appeal? And what we also talk about, yeah, buts. The people may say, yeah, I'd love to work with Occupy, but, and you know, we really have to kind of work through that stuff. And then finally, I'll close with a little bit, depending on our time, thinking about recruitment and volunteers. So that's what I propose to do with you in the couple of hours that we have tonight. So let me just start off by asking you this, I mean, just in terms of the rationale piece. Why, and I also want to say that I realize, too, that alliance building may not be everybody's cup of tea. I mean, it's not an easy thing to do. It's got its challenges. There's give and take involved in it, and, you know, there are legitimate concerns that people have about submerging their interests with somebody else's or being co-opted. So I want to acknowledge all of that. I mean, I got a bias for this stuff. I'll be upfront about it. And I'm not trying to push it in the sense of jamming it down anybody's throat, but I think we do, let's start off by talking about a rationale for this. So let me just ask you, what brings you all to thinking about the need or the utility of aligning with other groups in the community? Yeah.
It increases the power. The more people you have, that's the biggest resource, the way I look at it, is people power.
So power is a strong consideration. What else brings you to thinking about it?
Diversify the people who are wanting and moving the thing forward.
Okay. Power, diversity. Yeah.
Ideas.
Ideas.
Necessity.
Necessity. Well, let me actually ask you, what do you, and that's a great term, what do you mean by necessity?
Well, like, for example, I'm working on a downtown campaign right now. Alliance building is an absolute necessity. I'm putting myself in a place where the automatic reaction is that I'm acting counter to the interests of those around me.
Right.
And so, in many ways, bridge building has become, I just went and spent $15 in a restaurant with someone who doesn't really like me. And there was a reason I did that. And so it's like, it's necessity. This person thinks I'm trying to damage their business. This is how it looks.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, no. Well, good, you know, because again, I think it's just important to have a shared sense of rationale behind this. Any other reason? Yeah, Lauren.
Well, especially with Occupy, since it is supposed to be such a broad, nonpartisan movement, in order to continue to keep up that tradition or that reputation, we need to make sure that we don't get kind of incestuous in our own alliance here.
Yeah.
Broader ownership, so more people feel like it's their
Right.
circle.
Yeah, well, I think those are all good and important rationales that have driven people in terms of thinking about this. Let me do something with you, a little visual thing to help underscore this point. So what I need here is I need 3 volunteers. I need somebody who wants to be a corporate CEO for 5 minutes. All right, come on up here. I'm going to let you be the corporate CEO, and I've made everybody a little thing here. Who wants to be a banker? Now, not everybody raise your hands all at once. Who wants to be a banker? All right.
Maybe just stand up.
Yeah, okay. And who wants to be one of the wealthy 1%? Okay. I was going to make 1/10 of 1%, but it got too complicated. I'm kind of low tech on these things. So you guys stand up over here, and let's do this. So let's start off, let me see how we divide this room up here. Let's have you 3 on the couch here, and the person over here. You got to get over there with them. Yeah, you get over there with them. So if you guys could all just stand up for a second. Is that hard to do?
People on the
Stand up. Can't stand up. All right. Well, let me, all right.
I'm standing.
All right, you're standing. All right. Well, I'm going to say that you guys are, you ever heard of the group CALSA? It's the Oregon Immigrant Rights Group. Okay. So, were you able to get immigration reform, comprehensive immigration reform, tuition equity in the DREAM Act passed?
No.
Yeah, no. Not so much. Okay, sit down. All right.
We've been rejected.
You guys back here from, your name is Allie, kind of over to the fellow here who's in the sweatshirt? Liberty. Was that? Liberty. Liberty. Okay, you guys can stand up. You guys can. So you're going to be the union movement, okay? For now. So the union movement really tried hard to get legislation passed in Washington that would make it easier for workers to organize unions. How did that work for you? Did you get it? No. You guys sit down. Your name is Ann, and fellow next to her, you three, and the two folks behind the pole there. You guys can stand up. So you're going to get to occupy Wall Street. So you guys are interested in debt forgiveness, right? One of the things you want to do? How did that work? Were you able to get that done yet? Not at all. All right, you guys sit down. Okay. And you guys over here, you guys are going to be environmental organizations. Okay? Were you able to get climate change legislation passed? Yep. All right. Not so much? All right, you guys sit down. All right. So now, let's look at our friends up here. Okay? So you're corporate CEO. Did you get favorable trade deals? Were you able to block the right to organize and have all these tax shelters?
You betcha.
Okay. Better. Did you get your bailout?
Got everything I wanted.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay. I like that role play folks getting the spirit out of it. And the wealthy 1%, did you get your tax breaks?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I know you want some more. Okay. You guys can stay standing up. Okay. So, and now you guys can now sit down. Yes. And you want to keep those who welcome to, or you might feel tainted by them, I understand. But in any case, the point of this is supposed to have a little bit of fun, but also is to say that there's some folks here that have a lot of power, a lot of resources, a lot of money, a lot of political influence, all kinds of things, and they're getting done what they want. But others of us, whether we're immigrant rights groups, we're the union movement, we're environmental groups, we're Occupy, you look at a lot of other groups, it's kind of hard for us, and we may even be working with other people already, but to get some of the stuff we want on our own. It's just not that easy a thing to do. Another way I like to illustrate this, can you just hit the next one? Thanks. Some of you may have seen this image before. In fact, one of my great regrets is I used to have this on a T-shirt, and I think from multiple washings it went up to here, so I don't wear it anymore. I think I gave it to one of my kids, but it's one of my favorites, and it's just this sense in a visual way, you know, that there are big fish out there, but the little fish band together, you know, we can take on the big fish. And I just would say that also, one of the things that I got in my toolkit is I'm a historian of social movements and the union movement. And I just think there's a lot to say historically when we've really made strides or accomplished big and important things in terms of social movements in this country, that broadly based coalitions had something to do with it. So if you could hit the next slide, I just wanted to mention the United Farm Workers. And there's actually a wonderful book I heartily recommend. Marshall Gans is one of the pioneering organizers of the farm workers. And the title of the book is Why David Sometimes Wins. You know, David doesn't always win. I mean, Goliath is pretty powerful, but David sometimes wins. And I mean, you guys, I think, are inspiring us to think about that way again. But just in terms of the United Farm Workers, you think about how amazing it was. Migrant farm workers, I mean, people who were among the most vulnerable, the most powerless, the most marginal of folks, that the conventional wisdom was these folks will never be able to organize a union. And there was a long history of those folks getting beaten down, literally. I mean, not just figuratively, beaten down. Among the most powerful interests in this country, right, are agricultural interests. I mean, it's just enormously powerful. So the farm workers put together, and this is work I can just testify to this personally as well as historically, unions. And it was other unions that to some degree, I mean, they just, you know, the basic principle of the union movement, which is sometimes forgotten, is that an injury to one, you know, is an injury to all. The strong help the weak. Some unions had forgotten that, but with the farm workers, they rediscovered it. It was amazingly energizing to see some of these unionists who've been around since the 30s rediscover their youth again. I think Occupy's kindled that with you folks too. But you saw the union movement coming together around the students were enormously important in terms of the farm workers. I don't think it could have been done without the work of students. Faith-based organizations, and we'll be talking about all of this in a minute when we start to think about alliances. Particularly the Catholic Church, but I got to know more clergy in the course of doing that movement. I mean, I began to feel, you know, like I was in church. It was just an amazing movement as far as the moral force that clergy brought to that movement. Elected officials, there were a number of them that were willing to take stands on behalf of those workers. Consumers, thousands, even if not millions of consumers, you know, there were people that didn't know the taste of grapes or lettuce or Gallo wine or any of those things. In fact, they were probably good boycotts in some ways anyway, given the quality of the products. But in any case, it was good to lose, you know, for the consumers to be involved. Women's groups certainly saw solidarity with women workers, lots of community organizations. So I just want to say that there's a whole historical basis in terms of movements. You think about justice for janitors, which the service employees did. Janitors who, again, like farm workers, were marginalized, vulnerable, had organized. Doing, you know, those who have organized in cities across the country with broadly based coalitions are doing, you know, quite a bit better. Their lives are really functionally different. Civil rights movement, and the essay that I put up, I think it was on the web by Andrew Levison, suggests that there were a lot of different folks involved in the civil rights movement, not just African Americans. So I think if we want to make big change, and that's the thing I sense you all want to do, and I want to do, and I think we're all inspired by that prospect to do the David and Goliath battles. I think that alliance building is really pretty critical to trying to do that, with all the problems that go with it. You know, no question about that. So I just wanted to say a few words in terms of thinking, you know, about a rationale for this and why it's so important.
Gordon gave us a handout, like a 100-page handout that's linked to his session on Cesar Chavez. Like he said was his favorite. That's available to books. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I think all these are really very strong rationales, both the ones you gave and just a little thing that we did in terms of folks standing up and some of the historical stuff. So I just wanted to say that's, I think, why we need to be thinking about it, and I must have gratified that you're thinking of those terms. The next thing I think we need to do then, if we're interested in alliance building, is to think about, well, who our potential allies are. So what I want to do is to go up over here to this paper, and here what I want to do is think organizations, okay? I mean, individuals obviously are important. There are, certainly individuals you want to bring on board. But I'm thinking in terms of organizations and institutions, entities that might be potential allies, just to brainstorm them up there. And so to think as broadly as possible about who those might be. So I'll start over here, and I'm going to write these down as you've given to me, and then I'll move over there, and we'll get them all up, and then we'll have something, we'll start to do a map after that. So let's get some things. Who are some potential allies if you think of organizations or institutions in this community or surrounding communities?
Already, we have faith-based, we have interfaith.
Okay, so let me just get some of these up here. So you say faith-based?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you mean existing or potential?
Well, what I'm talking about is there are organizations that are existing. Okay, for example, ex-church or ex-mosque or ex-synagogue, existing organizations that you would think that might be potential allies.
She meant existing as in we're now collaborating with them?
Oh, sure, that's fine too, yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's fine, I'm sorry, yeah, that's fine too. Yeah.
The UMO and Lane.
Yeah, okay, so we'll put up, students, yeah. Let me just say, what we're going to do after this is I want people to go up, and if you have a connection to any of these, to write them up there. So what we're doing is a kind of community map. And what this is going to show, I think, is where you're strong or where you have possibilities and where you might have, where you already have stuff and where you don't have stuff. And then we'll have a visual view of, what your alliances and connections already look like. Because the other thing is, I think it's always a little easier to build connections where you already have them. You can, and certainly you may be making cold calls on people, that's just what we end up doing. But if you already have an existing connection with X church or X student group or whatever, those are often the best people to make those contacts. So is that clear? Yeah. Okay. So what else we got? We got faith-based, we got students, what else do we have?
Environmental, labor, or union.
Okay, hold on a second. I can't write that down. Environmental, labor.
Local economy.
Was that local economy? I think what I may do is just ask people to go up and write up their specific names underneath these categories. So let me just run over here.
Tons of those.
Edit or on,
Okay, what else we got?
Special interest.
I'm sorry.
edit or on.
Health for all? Okay, so healthcare.
We the peeps.
Well, let's see.
We the people.
Well, we should do some broadcast. Let's call them community organizations, okay? Because you get into some specifics. So let's call these community organizations.
Okay. Helio.
What was that?
Helio.
Helio? Okay, yeah. So again, I'm trying to think of broad categories,
How about businesses?
Yeah, businesses. I sure hope so. Because I'm going to get those discounts in a few years. Sure.
Arts and cultural.
Art, cultural, okay.
Local collectives and cooperatives.
Collectives and cooperatives, sure.
Communities of color.
Okay, I guess I'll start down here. Food?
Providing, organic agriculture.
Will that go under collectives and cooperatives, or is that the second category? Food?
That's like St. Vinny's or David asked.
With non-profits? Yeah. We should put non-profits? Yeah. And some of these are a little, can spill over into each other. They're not, we won't make them rigid. But non-profits.
A live streamer has suggested veterans organizations.
Yeah.
Government entities, government related. Did anybody say union? Yeah, teachers.
Yeah, anybody say union?
No.
Yeah, they did.
Teachers.
Teachers.
Education.
Nurses.
Environmental assets, do we have any?
Yeah, we've got environmental.
Environmental, occupied groups? Occupied groups? Well, sure, that's, actually,
Media?
well, hold on a second. Somebody said media, let's put that up. Okay, we got occupied groups. And was there one I missed?
We have mental health up there?
Mental health organization?
It could be under human rights though, right?
Okay. Yeah, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you an opportunity to put your existing, connections up here. You can list any group here that you have a specific connection to. So here's where you can say, if I know the teachers union or the nurses union, or a food group, or a human rights organization, just to write those up. So let's take a few minutes and do that. Let me reconvene us. And I know it's a little hard to read from this distance, but this is really, again, to just demonstrate that you already have a lot of existing, and again, this could be knowing just an individual within a group, it could be a deeper relationship. That's all stuff we have to kind of figure out. But if you look at this as a kind of map of your existing relationships, what does this say to you in terms of your relative strengths and weaknesses?
Somebody has EPC down?
Anybody just any reflections on what this reveals?
Doesn't look like we have very many politician connections. Or veterans.
Yes, veterans and Paul.
work on our LGBTQ.
Oh, I can put one under that.
We have some politicians, so I put lunch next to our resource and
Yes,
Yeah.
and Rob Handy.
Candy
Rob Handy, yes.
Okay. So there's,
That's a good
yeah.
one, right? Usually, you know, Rob Handy. I'm the most hated person in Eugene. No, you're not. Especially when it comes to coffee companies.
Oh, I suspect there's a few more people that hate.
Yeah, it depends on who hates you.
Really, very cool.
And let me just ask this, are most of these connections based on knowing an individual, or are they or any of them at an institutional level where you've met with leadership of these organizations and have been talking about an alliance?
Already with Occupy?
Yeah, I mean, just, in terms of where things stand now. There's both.
Yeah, but I would say a lower percentage that have actually been approached to come into Occupy.
Yeah, in some more formal type of alliance with some sense of mutual, an ask for a mutual obligation.
Yes.
Because, I think the starting point for all of this is, do you have an existing connection? Because it's obviously much better not to have to make a cold call. I mean, there's going to be some of those things that you're going to have to do. But it seems like you've got a pretty broad-based set of, of different types of organizations. I think the challenge then becomes, well, how do you sort all this out? It's easy enough to put all this stuff up on a wall. So now I think the questions become, two questions really. One is evaluating potential allies, and then the next thing is what do we want them to do? And the other thing I think is you might also want to relate it, and this is a question, I know with Gordon, you guys started to talk about specific campaigns or focuses, but have you decided on specific focus? You haven't decided on that yet. Okay, May 4th, okay. Because it's always, I think that not that this is premature, it's just that I think the types of allies you look for depend on the types of campaigns you're running. So to some degree, that's something to factor in. But if I just put up here some different criteria for choosing allies that I wanted to just talk with you a little bit about, and then just ask you if you look at these allies, how you would evaluate them, because people have different allies bring different things to the table. So for example, numbers. You might want, an ally that can turn people out, depending on what you want to do. Some allies might be better equipped to do that than others. So I think that's just one of the types of calculations you have to make if you want numbers who's equipped to do that. Some have a kind of reputation or standing in the community that can be important in a campaign, just because people look and they go, wow, if that organization is behind it, well, that's really something. That tells us X or Y or Z. Reliability and credibility. Some allies you might not want so much because their reputations or standing might not be so good. Or that you may have had where somebody had an experience, we worked with them and they weren't reliable. They said they would bring this number of people, but they said they would do this and they didn't do that. Similar interest and potential for common ground. That's, I think, really one of the tough ones in this, is, what is the basis by which you're going to work together, in determining that. And that may not exist for all of these organizations. Political influence or pressure, depending on who the decision makers are that you want to influence. Are there people that actually can exert some sort of political or economic pressure on them? Those sorts of things would be important. And then there's finally questions of resources. And again, I'm just throwing these up. I'm not saying all of these are ones you've used, but sometimes it's information, sometimes it's money, it's other types of resources as well. So there's a lot of different things, and there may even be things I don't have up here in terms of evaluating allies. But if you look at this list and you look at what's up there, is there any just initial thoughts people have in terms of who you think would be, because again, I don't know what your staffing is, your time is, and all of that. I was fortunate when I did a lot of this work. I was a full-time paid staff person. That's all I did, was go out and meet with people, drink coffee, talk to them, find out what our interests were, and line them up. And so I had that as a, I would say 40, I had it as a 60 to 70 hour a week job. I suspect many of you are doing other things in addition to this. So that's where I think being able to make some decisions on the basis of evaluating allies is important. And that's not to say that I'm not dismissing anybody on this list. But in terms of how you might set your priorities, do you have any thoughts in terms of these types of criteria and the things you want to do and who might be the best allies to initially approach?
Well, definitely it seems like the similar interests and potential for common ground would be an easier alliance to build potentially.
That's, yeah, for sure. And I think the tough thing in here is that, you know, there are some that will be easy enough, they'll be natural affinities. There are others, and it's kind of, you know, the usual suspects, and can you reach beyond that, or, you know, do you want to? Because I think sometimes you get in a group and they go, wow, they're with them, I wouldn't have expected that. And, you know, those are just, again, all considerations to have. But there's sort of the lower hanging fruit, and then there's the stuff that might take more time to get to. But any other thoughts on just in terms of how you're thinking about, how you begin to think about evaluating allies? Or are there other criteria that you might be thinking about that aren't up here?
Well, given some of our tactics in terms of doing protests and rallies and things like that, organizations that can bring out numbers, obviously is a big part of Occupy in general, and serves to keep us slightly intimidating to the city and police and stuff like that. So I'd say that would be a high priority.
Special expertise, because of what y'all were just talking about. I think Lauren's network, like of lawyers, is
I think it bears considering when looking at this list what kind of ally we make.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So to talk a little bit more about that, let's break that down a little bit more.
Well, I mean, if others are in the community are looking to build, you know, allies for their issues and causes, and they're thinking going through the same checklist and criteria, you know, it's important. I mean, we could potentially bring numbers, you know, reputation, standing in the community. We've been around, you know, for a while. We have some good key people who have good reputations. I just think as we looking at other people deploying as allies, that we should also consider how others look at us as a potential ally as well.
Yeah, and that's actually, we're going to get to that in a second, because I think when you start to do this, there's going to be conversations that you need to have with folks. And, you know, it's kind of what's the common ground, what's the common interest, and trying to find that. In some cases, that will be easy or relatively natural. In other cases, it might take some more work in terms of doing that. And actually, what I want to do is actually have you, in a little bit, pick a group that you might want to ally with, and have you do it in small groups, how you would appeal to that particular group. Because the appeal is not going to be the same, I think, to every group. You know, what you might say to a church group might be different than what you would say to a veterans group or a senior citizens group. I mean, not to say that you're being dishonest or anything like that, but again, the grounds for common interest may be different depending on the group. It's a different conversation, I think, from group to group, so I want to have you spend a little bit of time working on that. But again, I think it's just important to think in terms of these criteria. It's a little bit difficult because until you pick the campaign, you know, again, some campaigns numbers might be more important. Some campaign economic pressure could be more important. So again, these are just all things I think you're going to need to take a look at, you know, in terms of thinking about allies. Yeah.
Another criteria that I use a lot is the ideology, or the kind of perception and the vision people have for the future. I would think there are some local conservative organizations that I'd say would meet all those criteria, but still be, like, we might even have political common ground, but their overall vision for things, the language they talk about, the values they use are very different.
Right.
And I think bridging that gap and how we can talk about, say, you know, a free market and an equitable distribution is a big problem, even when you can both say, yeah, local taxation is crazy. That's a big issue.
And sometimes the common ground isn't there. You know, I mean, as much as we'd like to find it, sometimes it isn't there. And I think you also, those are political decisions you also have to make as well, because X organization may say to you, there's a mutual thing that goes on here. We want you to support us on this, and you may say, we don't think we can. I mean, we can't go there. And it's a tough thing. For example, I mean, one of the coalition things that's been difficult sometimes has been working with the Catholic community because the social issues tend to be ones that a lot of people will disagree. Abortion, for example. The union movement, say, in the Catholic Church, Catholic Church has been very strongly pro-worker, but the abortion issue is one that a lot of people in the union movement that are for choice, a lot of people in the Catholic Church that aren't. And so those are, sometimes you just have to agree to disagree on certain things and find where that common ground is. And those can get dicey at times as well.
What about, for concerns about co-option or usurping your organization's mission?
Yeah.
Would that be a factor that you would be looking at as an ally?
Well, I think that when you get down to having the conversation with somebody and if they're asking you to do things or to bend or shift or cut your cloth to close in a different way, I think you have to say, that's where I think that stuff comes in. And again, it's really trying to find that common ground. I mean, for example, one thing I just noticed is the political piece seems to be one there's less on. And I have this impression that, Occupy in terms of official politics has had a bit of an arm's length relationship with certainly, shall we say, some skepticism or whatever term may be appropriate, which I think is quite understandable. So those are, I think, the types of relationships that can be tricky because politicians certainly are real good at co-opting people and, have their own very distinct sorts of interests and all of that. So it's one of those I think you just have to, have a few coffee dates and, be real careful before you move to the next level, so to speak. So I think that those are legitimate concerns. Yeah.
Question. When you say co-opting, is it concerns about the message getting co-opted by, say, some leading politician or groups outright taking a bunch of resources?
Not so much stealing resources other than possibly volunteers. I was thinking more like, the Democratic Party, coming up with an election, wants all of us to go knock on doors and, pitch for Democrats because they assume we're pro-Democratic Party, but, that would be sucking our energy away towards their cause, short-term goals, and wouldn't necessarily help any of our goals that, required.
And I think those are the types of negotiations, again, you have to consider, in terms of, how much of yourself do you have to sell or give away to get something in return? And is that a bargain that's reasonable or makes sense or is it meeting enough of your interest to make it one worth getting into? So I think those are all the types of considerations. So I just want to, just underscore again that, like I say, I think it's great that you've got a lot of these connections already. And in terms of then the next step is how you make them into more of a working alliance. And that's where I think you have to enter into a fairly deep conversation with somebody about common interests and what that relationship might look like. But let me just ask this, are there any, out of this, are there any groups up here that just come off the screen for you in terms of saying that you might, again, I'm not trying to hold you to setting your priorities right now, but is there anything that suggests itself that these might be in your top 3 or 5 or whatever list?
Other Occupy groups.
Other Occupy groups.
Students and labor.
Labor, yeah.
Large umbrellas. A lot of those things.
Yeah.
Environmental.
Environmental, yeah. And that's the other thing is, the other question you might, you can ask yourself too is, how many members do these groups have?
I was going to say faith-based. The
Yeah.
churches are a great place to build membership. Numbers.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just want to mention one thing. We do have a list of allies on Rise Up, under Outreach, and what we would like everybody to do is look at that list, and if you have a connection with that organization, put your name and contact number there. So go right in and edit the document. We're trying to create an allies list where we have individuals lined up with those organizations. So it's on Rise Up, under Outreach.
Yeah, because, again, you know, if it's numbers that you want, that might suggest going towards certain types of organizations. I mean, all of these things, some organizations may have more than one of these dots next to their name, others may have, you know, things that are more particular. So those are the types of things I think you need to keep in mind, and also in terms of your resources, in terms of doing the outreach. So again, I just think those are kind of the calculations that begin to go into this, in terms of who you talk to. So let me ask you this, what do you want your allies to do? Before we get into the actual conversation itself, I mean, what are some of the things that you might want allies to do? March. So you want them to actually participate very directly? Come to action, okay?
Educate their members.
Educate their members. So you would want
Multiply their members.
Okay.
Donate.
Was that? Donate, okay, so money,
Supplies, donate.
supplies, money, yeah.
Volunteer their time.
Volunteer their time,
Petition.
petitions,
Work for a common cause.
feed us.
With research.
This guy wants to march and have him feed him too. I love you, who's gonna spell it?
Provide space.
Assisted research on issues.
Okay, so research on issues, yeah, and,
Boycott.
boycotts, okay. Media,
Provide space.
provide space, okay, yeah. But you can get different types of things from different allies, because, you know, not everybody may be ready to march, or to engage in direct action or civil disobedience, but they might be willing to supply research or give you money, or to sign a petition or do those sorts of things. So there's kind of that laundry list, so to speak, or even hierarchy kind of things that we might expect from allies. And, you know, again, not all allies are equal, depending on what you want. Some may be more willing to do some of these things than others. So, yeah, let me just put up, I just kind of put a little list together that I think is sort of very similar to the one that you guys put up there. So, you know, letters, phone calls, petitions may not, you know, again, none of these things, I mean, I look at the way we have these fights, they're like 15 rounds. We don't have a knockout punch in the first round, but we cumulatively can beat our opponents up pretty well if we come at them from a lot of different angles. So all of these things I think can be useful, and some groups may be more willing to do them than others. And I'm going to make this PowerPoint available to you all afterwards, so, you know, I mean, you want me to take notes, but I also will, you know, make this available so you
Get it on the website.
can download it. So, and then I didn't actually put money or resources on there, just I wasn't, I just wasn't sure if that was the primary need or not, but obviously you could add those. Oh, I did. Got more stuff than I thought I had. Yeah, technical support. And I think political or economic influence, I just want to highlight that. I mean, for example, if you're going after banks, you know, if there are people that have deposits or have sizable holdings that, you know, I just, quick story, we were working on the J.P. Stevens Company. One of the things we found out in the late 1970s was that a lot of unions had pension funds. And they were invested in banks. So there was a bank in New York called Manufacturers Hanover, where his nickname was Manny Hanny. You remember Manny Hanny, yeah. And there was a wonderful guy I knew in the garment workers union named Dick Sanfilippo, and Dick had about $6 million, his union had about $6 million in pension funds in Manny Hanny. They had a guy who was on the board of directors at J.P. Stevens. We were targeting the board of directors. Because if you could start to undermine their support by getting these folks on the board of directors to resign, suddenly it's like all the allies they had, you know, you would have stripped their allies away from them. Well, all Dick had to do was threaten. He didn't actually pull his money out. He just said to them, I'm going to take $6 million out of your bank unless this guy resigns. It didn't take all that long for the guy to send his resignation in. And it's not always that easy. But I'm saying in terms of power analysis, and I know you guys are doing that, you know, that type of pressure, I mean, again, I don't know the whole thing in terms of banks or what they're doing or any of that, but if we begin to think in those sorts of terms and their allies like unions or some of these groups that actually happen to have sizable funds, I mean, that's just one example of how some of this stuff can come down and how allies can be extremely, extremely important, in addition to marching and putting their bodies on the line. You're sick, okay, sorry, again.
Maybe as a side note, you could give us some tips on how you do that type of research research on finding out board of directors and where the interests are.
Yeah. I mean, that's the whole thing in terms of power analysis and where the power is and what you got to do to shame, embarrass, and cost them in such a way that they want to sell. You know, I mean, they don't usually do it willingly, but but they will if there's something in, you know, I mean, we already see the effects on some of these banks in terms of the credit card fees and all of that, how quick they were, you know, I mean, the bottom line is the bottom line, and that's why all these different groups can be influential. So those would be some of the types of asks, and I think as you develop relationships with allies, you're going to want to have your list of things you're going to want them to do and tailor their particular types of allies. So let me ask you this, and we started to talk about this, where we're headed is I want to actually have you work on thinking about particular appeals to some of these particular groups as a small group exercises and then share those. But first let me ask you this, we talked about this a little bit earlier. You're going to be going out, you're going to start to talk to different organizations, and I mentioned earlier the yeah buts. Almost everybody has a yeah but, you know, that they, and of course Occupy, you know, you guys have done some stuff, some daring stuff, some public stuff. And so depending, some of these organizations may say, yeah, right on, you guys are cool, sign on the dotted line, whatever you want me to do. And others may be a little more reluctant. They might have some images of you. They might say, yeah, you know, I really appreciate all you've done, but. So I wanted to just talk to you a little bit about what do you think some of your yeah buts are going to be, and how would you address them in going out and having these conversations. I think that's just a real important first consideration in all of this before we get to thinking about specific appeals before specific organizations. The yeah but is really key. So yeah, what?
We don't have a traditional organizational structure.
Right. Yeah, I was going to say, if I was trying to decide how to approach you guys, I would
I've heard that one a couple times already.
But, yeah, so there might be organizations that are just wondering how you're structured, how you make decisions. And actually, you'll have the same question of them as well. Because if you want an endorsement from an organization, you know, everybody has their own different thing. Some of them are quite convoluted. Some of them can't give you a decision right away. They've got to ask a hierarchy, you know, those are all important things to know. Yeah?
They might say, yeah, but I don't want to get arrested.
I don't want to get arrested, okay?
A lot of people seem to have that image that all we do is just show up somewhere and get arrested. That's where I'm finding. And I would say, no, that's not the case. Actually, that's not common that we get arrested. You know, it's been some profile incidents, but they're not the common thing that we do every day.
Right. So you're going to have to kind of allay that image in people that you're just strictly about direct action, some disobedience, getting busted, that type of stuff. Yeah.
As far as some potential conservative allies go, as Lauren mentioned, there seems to be the stigma that the Occupy movement is a purely left-leaning liberal movement, and that's a stigma that it would be nice to have some cohesive schools to be able to present to somebody to get over.
Yeah.
We have Republicans among us.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm going to get a few of these out, and I want to just have a little discussion about how you would address them. This brother here talked a little bit about the arrest thing. You've got the decision-making thing. You've got the political image thing. Somebody over here.
I was going to say, I just heard someone tell me today, she said that she's getting feedback from her colleagues or friends, church folks that says, oh, that's interesting that you're doing that, but you're not really hanging out with those people, are you? And, you know, I was trying to think, you know, what do you say, but, you know, have you tried it? Have you ever been there? Did you ever go to the camp? Did you ever, you know, have you ever sat down with people in Occupy your camp? Yeah, or nay? And then make the choice. We know it's better than to make those kind of assumptions, but I think it's an easy way to call a person. So have you ever, what's your experience? Oh, you have no experience, then why are you saying that? You know, hearsay. Check it out.
Do you people have a job?
You have a job? Yeah.
Do you have any goals?
Do you have any goals? Yeah, let's talk about how do you address some of these questions? How do you address the question about your decision-making structure? Yeah.
Occupy is my occupation.
Occupy is your occupation. Okay.
Well, we have federal assembly and then we in the site census.
Yeah. Okay.
But lots of groups don't like that because they want an executive director, or they want a president, or they want a single person that they can go to as a bottom liner.
So, are they concerned that that they don't get a speedy response, or?
I think it's accountability. You know, if you don't have one person, how do you prove somebody accountable for what they said they're going to do?
Yeah.
We have to say that we are not a leaderless movement, we are a leaderful movement. And some of my friends or people I interact with get it, and I guess aren't ready yet.
And I think those are the types of things you're going to have to work through, is that people are going to have to respect your organizational style and being a leaderful movement. But at the same time, I think you could also talk to them about that we are accountable, that we do make decisions, that our word is good, all those things. It just may be, that, you can't just go to one person and get a decision tomorrow. But then again, you can a lot of other organizations have their own their own decision-making processes that can be real labyrinthine themselves. I'm in a thing right now with that myself. Trying to get the city council to approve a resolution and talk about just, talk about a process. Talk about a process. Yeah.
You could ask them if they would consider what it would be like for them if they were in that situation, being privileged or whatever.
I'm sorry. Okay.
If they would, we could ask them if they would consider what it would be like for them if they were in such a position themselves.
Okay.
Like being homeless.
Unless, well,
Right.
they are.
Right. So there's a question of empathy, sympathy, putting walking in somebody else's shoes.
Maybe engage them in, some relevant things that are happening that everybody's experiencing. What's going on with the economy? What's going on with education, etc. Because that's how you can connect with people and then, hopefully dissolve all the stereotypes.
Yeah, and that's getting into, I think, the type of discussion that, and I want to get into the specifics of that, I think, in terms of trying to find the common ground, with people. Yeah.
Give them opportunities to come be educated in movie nights that are hosted by IUG, or public discussions, that sort of thing. Make it more available to them.
Network more when we have events that include new people, new faces that we don't see, like the Trayvon Martin thing last night. I know it kind of feels, Monday night, it feels like old home week because we see people that we don't necessarily see because we're not in the same rooms and we're all hanging out. But we've got to make the effort as well to spend some time intentionally talking to new faces about what we're doing. And hopefully we'll have newsletters that we can start handing out at those kinds of events. Like
And I think that's the thing about this work is that, a vibrant movement is one that is attracting new faces, that is reaching beyond the usual suspects, that is getting, the ripples just keep spreading out. And I think that's one of the key rationales, for doing this. Let me ask one other question, then we can move on and talk about the actual conversation itself. But Stella here had mentioned, and a couple of you, that the sense that Occupy is just liberal, lefty, whatever. How do you deal with the about ideology, or this kind of view or stereotype that, you're just this? Yeah.
Well, everybody was ripped off by the big banks when they had the big depression that happened in 2008. Even the small businesses can't get loans, so they are your allies. So everybody, lost a lot of money through their pensions. So it's like, and then these big banks have their own culture that they are, they will rip people off and they laugh at them. So why should they be above the law?
So that's some of the common ground there, is that everybody's had a kind of common experience in terms of being affected by the behavior of these institutions.
We're just saying that 99% consists of Republicans, Democrats, and every other right.
Right. Yeah.
I'm trying to co-opt words back. So like free market. Conservatives love that free market, and so I just want to try to point out how unfree the market is under current relations. And for example, the federal government seized hundreds of millions of dollars from American poker players, from the big site poker stars and a few other ones. And that's almost not talked about. B, it's a complete violation of free market. It's one of the most egregious forms of government intervention and regulation. And it was largely orchestrated by conservative politicians, in addition with liberal politicians. So it's like, if we want to talk about free market, if we believe it's appropriate, maybe we should define a business as something smaller than 500 people, you know, and talk about micro business and shift these terms so that we actually live up to a free market instead of playing this hypocritical. But, you know, most of our conservatives don't let themselves get there, so we got to help them.
Yeah. That's the Lord's work. I do appreciate what you're trying to do there.
Patty, what I sometimes tell people is say, if you can't go on or do these things, too much radical change, I think, really, is everything working okay for you? Does everything seem like this is going fine for you? Or do you think maybe we're ready for a change? Do I know what that change is? No, but I'm doing something. What do you think?
Sure. Something I once read that was useful is when you're trying to build allies, always think about the shared experience between you. But when you're thinking about opposition or interacting with them, always go outside of their common shared experience.
Yeah.
While we're mentioning co-opting words, I think if you're trying to change somebody's mind in conversation, it would work against you to say buzzwords that have popped up around the Occupy movement, like dropping 99% and dropping, Occupy the streets and kind of sounding, I don't know, those sorts of buzzwords have a lot of connotations in them, and instantly, you say 99%, instantly some of these people start thinking of, whatever Fox News thing that they saw about the crazy 99%ers, blah, blah, blah. I think that being creative when you approach people and completely just not using buzzwords at all would really hit home with some people, because that gives them a platform to kind of understand what's behind those words. Then the next time they hear the word 99%, they don't instantly think of a bunch of creative.
Well, what Plato was beyond the common shared experience, I was thinking of, there was the Empower the 99% that we had a panel discussion on, we had two people, one was a libertarian, one was progressive, and they shared their common experience, so they didn't really talk much about the strong divide, the divisive topics. But the libertarian, his whole thing, was about the big government. I brought up the other side. I said, well, what about big corporation? Because that's that big divide there. And it's also looking at everything in its entirety, how everything, it's the myth that this country was based on, bigger is better. And it's gotten extremely big and complex. And to put it in perspective, that it's just not one side, it's all of it.
So I think one core thing that I see a lot of resistance to change is scary, and they sometimes view, what we're striving for as anarchy and destroying everything that exists and leaving them unsafe, that we're kind of like fanning the flames of disaster or Armageddon by, trying to change what has existed for so long.
Right, yeah. There is a powerful impulse around security, order, the known, and all those sorts of things. But again, I think you guys have captured analytically, what's going on. I think the 99% is a brilliant way of framing the issue. The other thing I think that becomes important in these relationships is telling stories. That when you start to talk to people and you tell your personal story, how I got involved in this, why I got involved in this, and try to find out their story as well. You're talking to the church person, and you're talking to the small business, and you get the story about their life and how their life, and I think what ultimately we're talking about how all our lives have been affected, distorted, the quality of our lives and our communities and our families has all been affected and distorted by these things that a small group of people have done. And if we can get those stories out on the table and get some, and again, it's building a relationship. Ultimately, I think you have to move to building a relationship. And the one thing I would just caution you about, because I come out of the union movement and we were guilty of this for many, many years. We used to have this syndrome, we would call it rent-a-collar. So So the idea of it was that you had an event going on, you wanted to have a church person, namely a Catholic priest. So you kind of say, okay, come out to our action. We call it, it was called cynically rent a collar. The person would come out, the collar was a great visual and all of that, and then you wouldn't see them for 2 years till you wanted them again. And it was a very exploitive relationship, and people got onto us about that. And when they needed us, we weren't there for them. So I think the union movement still does that too much, but it's getting, Nancy's smiling, but it's getting better. It's getting better. And I just would caution you about that I mean, there's the urgency of wanting folks, but I think if we're talking about a movement that has the potential to last and grow, the relationships are absolutely critical, and that's where I think the story stuff becomes very important. Yeah.
I was wondering about making kind of organizations that help support alliances, like having a whole organization dedicated to throwing events, a whole organization dedicated to planning panels or something. I was wondering if there's much precedent.
My experience in these things is that people just work together as a set of groups, and and these things are kind of ad hoc and come and go depending on the issue. That's the other thing that's tough in terms of a coalition or an alliance that will be together all the time. It may be that they're a little more situational. So, for example, if you're doing something around foreclosure, there may be certain groups that gather together around that. That campaign has a certain shelf life in terms of a specific goal or action, and then you reconstitute and do some other things. But usually the organizations get together and they say, if we're going to do an event, maybe you have an informal type of steering committee or some sort of way, or somebody assumes responsibility for coordinating that, and then you move on that specific set of events or actions. I mean, I think it's a little tricky in terms of developing a whole new structure, just because, I think you can get structured out, in terms of, and this work is hard enough as it is. But I think most of the time, if you have a common interest that people want to work together, they'll find a way to make those things happen. Yeah.
I think that kind of fractures us. There's this, everything's so complex and so evolved. And we tend to, it's hard to really rally together as one real large movement.
Yes.
I was thinking in terms of the 3 E's, economics, environmental, and ethics, and how everything is so integrated, all these different groups, how to somehow bring it all together, for instance, when we hear Joe Baby kill, and we know that that's how the Republicans want to keep pushing the jobs, that's their only solution to jobs, which we can bring up jobs underneath that, and all these different things that, homelessness, polluting indigenous people's grounds, et cetera, that would all pivot around certain environmental issues that are in the national headlines, so that we can rally around that together somehow and bring all the different groups collaborate, how we can make our movement larger.
Well, I think that's when you get down to the local level, I think that's part of the conversation is, what is on the mind of a local environmental group, or what's on the mind of a local labor group. And there's, again, a sense that there's going to be an ask for mutual support. That a labor group may have a particular demand or a hot burning issue that may not be Occupy's immediate issue, but is very important to their constituents and their members. And of course, we can also have the conflicts because there's certain people, if you're a building and construction worker, oftentimes you want to build stuff and you may be less concerned about the environmental consequences. So again, I don't mean to say any of this is easy. These can be dicey conversations where, some of the stuff in terms of, that Occupy may have might, strike a bad chord with somebody else in terms of their interests. So those are all things I think that have to be worked out in terms of finding the common stuff.
I don't want to drag you off of topic because I know you've got a presentation, but to me one of the key concerns I see, especially for Occupy as we build alliances, is there is often this mutual ask. You come to mine, I'm going to come to yours.
Right.
And we're in the process of trying to narrow our focus and come up with these campaigns,
Right.
come up with work plans. How do you accommodate alliances and other organizations' asks while still focusing your resources on what you're trying to push forward?
Right. Well, I think you have to draw your boundaries with folks, So again, you may look at these things and tell allies, I think it's a question of capacity. I think you just have to be frank and just say at this time, you may be asking us to pull bodies or do this. We can't do that at this time. We can do X and Y. We can't do A, B, and C. But we can be supportive in certain ways, and I think you have to just kind of make those determinations based on capacity, time, and capability and all of that. And it's tough because some people may want, well, you may want more of them than they can give at a given moment, and they may want more of you than you can give at a good given moment. But I think it's the shared, and you probably have seen this already. To me, what really builds this stuff is not talking about it, but ultimately when you do it. I mean, unfortunately, I couldn't go to the Trayvon Martin rally the other night, but just as I read in the paper, just to see the breadth of groups that were there, I thought to myself, that's really pretty interesting, and that's really pretty extraordinary. And, you know, in Eugene, we haven't always, I think, had the best experience in terms of communities of color working with other movements. I think that's just a big thing to climb for a lot of movements here and everywhere. And the fact that around, you know, because, you know, somebody could say, oh, you know, it's a shame that, you know, somebody got shot, but it's not my issue. You know, that's it. People say that sort of thing. Or, you know, the banks, you know, yeah, that's, I get it, that's your issue. I think we just have to get out of that sense that it's your issue. But at given times, you know, you can't go all in. You know, you can go part of the way in. But I think you have to have a candid discussion about that in terms of your capacity at a given time and what you can do. In other groups, I think we'll have the same thing that they'll say of you. You have to have patience about it, you know. They may not be ready to ante up on some of these things right now, but over time, maybe they'll be willing to ante up more. And once they see you're reliable allies and what it looks like and feels like when you're working together, and people get the power, you know, I think the sky begins to come the limit on these things. Well, let's see. What I wanted to do, we're getting a little further in time, is I wanted to talk a little bit about specifically the types of conversations you begin to have with allies. So if we can move to in terms of what a conversation looks like with allies, if you just went to the next, yeah, thanks. So again, these are some of the types of questions, and we've kind of gone over these, but I think these are the types of things when you begin to approach. Again, portraying Occupy and its agenda. You know, and we've talked a little bit about that, some of the yeah buts and the types of things that, you know, people are going to want to know from you. We need to know a little bit of research on whoever we're approaching. To the extent that you can, whether it's through somebody that knows the organization, I mean, you can certainly go on a website, you can do a little bit of research ahead of time, but it's useful to have a little bit of intelligence on who you're talking to, if it's at all possible. I think that that's useful and important. The common ground, and what we can do to work together and support each other's interests. I mean, I think those are the key questions that will be brought in to any of these types of conversations. So let's go to I'm sorry, I've hit you on your dinner end, but you're showing how ambidextrous you are. So I think let's just do this as a group of the whole. What I wanted to do was just ask you in terms of thinking about appeal from a particular ally, and maybe we can just pick a few of these that you think are most significant and talk about it. But again, we've kind of talked both about and around this in certain ways. Not all allies are equal and not everybody's the same, and so I think when you go to approach somebody, you're going to want to customize or tailor your appeal. You know, so what you might talk about with a business, a political official, a church, a student, a labor group, I think it's all going to be a little bit different in terms of how you're going to explain Occupy to them, in terms of where they're coming from, their self-interest, those sorts of things. So what I wanted to suggest for a little while is if we could just pick a few of these organizations up here, particularly ones that you might say you most want to approach, and try to answer some of these questions about, you know, how you would appeal to some of these groups. So it's a little bit like, you know, with more time we actually do them as role plays. You know, you'll actually have 2 or 3 of you approach somebody else and actually work it as a role play. And I think those are useful things to do in terms of thinking about these conversations. And it also gets into the question of story and how you lay out, you know, why you're doing something, what you want to know about them. But let's pick a few of these. Is there, yeah, Lauren? Yeah,
well, I was thinking a couple of the campaigns that we're working on already, like Allie mentioned, have businesses as part of, and I know, like, I'm speaking at the Rotary Club coming up, and, you know, we've had some issues with, like, Chamber of Commerce and stuff like that, so maybe we could use that as our...
Well, let's talk, so let's talk about the Rotary Club. I've actually spoken to them, So how do you, in fact, I have to just say, you know, one of my most interesting early political experiences was during the Vietnam War. I went and spoke against the Vietnam War to the Rotary Club in my town. Not so good, actually. You know, it just, well, it actually was, they were polite and respectful. Rotarians are very polite and respectful. And painfully so at times. And that's not, no, I really like Rotarians, but I'm being tongue in cheek. But again, they may, you know, I think that's a great example because it might not, I mean, you know, just off the top of your head, you might say, gee, that's kind of an odd ally for Occupy. But I think actually it's exactly the, I mean, those are among the types of allies that are important to reach out to. But based on what we know about Rotary, I mean, what do we know about Rotary first? So what do we think might be some of the reasons in terms of tailoring and appeal to Rotary? Allie?
Well, 2 weeks ago, I was in front of the Rotary.
Oh, you were in front of us. So how did it?
I mean, it was definitely like maybe the hardest group I ever talked in front of because on one hand, it's like they're dedicated to service.
Right.
But in a very different cultural context, that, you know, it's like, I'm sitting here like, I'm the only one in this room who has not gone through menopause, you know, it's just like, there was this huge, you know, like, this is not my choir, you know? And I think, you know, one of the things is like, especially within Occupy, we're used to speaking to the choir. Or at least we're used to speaking to people who know our choir. You know, this was like, and I really, you know, it was sort of like, I mean, I always BS it, and that's part of my problem. I never think of what I'm going to say, because usually I figure, you know, I can wing it. I walk in there, and it's like, shit. You know, like, I have no idea what to say here. And luckily for me, the other person was Joe Tyndall, who, like, you know, killed them with facts for 15 minutes. It was like, oh, good, I can be lighthearted. But I guess, you know, it was like, I remember sitting there through that point just thinking, you know, where is the common ground here? And, you know, in many ways, you know, just pulling out of my butt like I did, I basically got out there and just started, you know, it was like, you know, be like Jesus without saying those. So it was like I kind of took that whole, like, you know, where can we pull, you know, helping people, not judging, you know, all those lovely value things, just kind of took them out of the cultural context and just basically presented, you know, us as a service organization. You know, it's not necessarily how I see ourselves.
Right.
But in translating them, it's like, we're a group of people, just, you know, we don't have as many formalized rituals as they do, God knows. I remember watching that whole, it's like Catholic Church. You know, stand up, sit down, take your drink, and like, we're sitting there like, oh, okay. But, you know,
Shouldn't say to me, I just told it home.
I said, you know, I didn't even realize I was doing this too. I agree to things, and I don't realize that I'm agreeing to until I come home the night before. Oh, yeah, right. But it was a valuable learning experience for me in that, like, you know, I could tell immediately in talking to them what was getting through and what was not getting through. And in many ways, like, de-emphasizing the specific political part, because, you know, there were a lot of people in that group who, you know, they are kind of the 1%, but they give a shit. So it was like, you know,
Who are they? I never heard of them.
Rotary is a service organization. So it's like, you know, it's all people from businesses who are devoted, but in many ways, you know, the difference between them and I, they look at charitable kind of top-down, whereas, you know, we look on a very, so that's where the divide was. Because, you know, there's part of them that's like, we want to give, and then I'm like, well, we want to empower. So it's like, where do we find that common ground? And so, you know, I kind of approach them, you know, if you give with dignity, you're empowering, as opposed to giving with a patronizing, you know, we're going to give you this. And, you know, and that's where I was able to find the common ground with them. And it was one of the things where as I was talking, I was just kind of watching people as I was talking. And as soon as I started hitting, you know, what I call the Jesus values. Don't judge people, don't treat people like crap, you're not better than them, you know. There's very little that separates. So once you kind of find, like, you know, the little that separate, that's where it all of a sudden it's like, oh, I got it. I get where the common ground was. And, you know, in many ways it came off a lot better than, like, give them 15 minutes worth of facts as to why we're screwed. Like, that didn't translate to that.
You got to meet them.
Yeah, and that was the thing. It was a good exercise for me in, like, meeting them.
I think you've done a great job of actually, you know, walking through just what this is in terms of.
This would help, though.
Well, that's what I'm saying is I think that if you could do some of that beforehand rather than in transit, it's always to your advantage. But, you know, you also have to be able to adjust on the fly as well. But I think this is exactly the type of calculation you need to do, particularly with groups that are not in that choir, you know, place. And so, yeah, I think that's very, very useful.
There's going to be an opportunity for somebody from Occupy to speak to the Unitarian Universalist Church membership, which is a great church. I mean, they're doers, they're thinkers and doers. And we need someone that could go and just talk they'll have a 20-minute slot, and it may even be on the day that they do a collection. for Occupy, there'll be a 20-minute slot to talk about, what Occupy means to me, what is Occupy. So we're definitely looking for people that will feel comfortable doing that.
I used to be a director of religious education at a Unitarian church for a year.
So perhaps we can draft a potato.
Let me just ask, in addition to recruiting somebody to do it, let's take a church, let's take a faith-based organization and put these questions up there. So, in a given faith-based organization, some like the Unitarians are generally extremely liberal, and probably would be an easier ask. Some like, there's a spectrum in terms of faith-based groups. But in terms of appealing to a faith-based group about Occupy or one of your issues, how would you begin to think about tailoring your appeal? So let's do some of the work now instead of doing it on the lectern of the pew.
Could we make that even narrower? Because we would like to see the church participation in a locker program where people could go, where there might be like a space set aside in the church where we could put lockers and the homeless people can leave their stuff there and then, get around town. So could we maybe make that the issue that we're approaching them on?
Sure, whatever issue you're going to approach them on, I think is your choice. It's just, so if you take homelessness as an issue that you're approaching the church on, what's the way in which you're going to tailor your appeal? Why is it in their interest?
That would be an easy issue, though.
Okay.
It'd be a really easy one. We're going to have a listening session on church on Sunday, the 29th. And I'm soliciting people who will come and speak as unhoused people at our church to generate and create compassion for folks in that situation to hear their stories.
So why is homelessness an easy issue for a church?
They care.
Yeah.
What's that?
They also see them.
Okay, yeah.
They're generally sanctuary when
Yeah.
others haven't been.
It's in all the traditions, right? If you look in almost every type of, religious text, clothe the naked, feed the hungry, that's in. They're not always committed to that, but it's in all those texts, right? But what's a harder ask? Let's take a harder ask for a faith-based organization.
I think about that.
Yeah. So how would you try to make an appeal to them on the basis of doing something like that?
Show how the inequity is creating some of this. It's more of a complex conversation.
Yeah, no, that's why I want to prod you on that, because I think the ones that are maybe most worth having are going to be the complex ones.
Or just comparing and contrasting between local credit unions in terms of donating to the community and their ties to the community versus a multinational bank.
If the bank is a person, and then if it's a person, how good or moral is that person really?
How fast is that person going to help?
Depending on if you have a faith that believes in the concept of help. Not all do. No, I'm teasing you.
Oh, cool.
Don't believe in you.
You could very easily pull up numbers that show the homeless population just practically doubling in size ever since the economic downturn, and you definitely correlate all kinds of good stuff with beautiful, truthful numbers.
Yeah. And I think facts are very important, but I think values are really the framework upon which you begin to hang your facts with a lot of organizations. Yeah.
So churches value community, they value family.
Yeah.
And if you look at economic policies that create poverty tends to have very bad effects on families. So if you're creating poverty, you're creating family issues.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
I think we should be doing research in allied one, and pretty much every major religion has a radical theological strain at some point or another. And you can look in the gospel to find evidence for acting radically. You can go, the classic one is throwing over the chairs and the money changers. The evidence is out there from every major religion for a radical strain.
Yeah.
And one of the things I think you're allowed to do, it should be as a social movement, is you can say, I may not belong to your faith, but I'm entitled to research it and say you don't belong to your faith because you're contradicting. And I think it's important that that we say, if we're gonna hold ourselves to a Christian country, then we actually act like that. And there are nothing like the interfaith occupiers trying to build that discourse.
Well, that's why I think there's a certain amount of research that's really useful in terms of approaching any organization, in terms of their, you look at their mission statement or their key text or whatever, and see what you can relate in terms of these, the service part of Rotary, whatever, what can you relate about what you do to that. The other thing I think with the church, for example, is that you could also talk to them about the issue that I'm raising. How, in the story I tell, is that affecting your community? Do you have parishioners or congregants who had their homes foreclosed, who have children who are going to college, who have college loans up the yin-yang that you're paying? Do you have? It's a self-interested thing at one level to say if you want to. I wouldn't quite put it this way, but implicitly, if you want to be a relevant church, you're responding to those sorts of issues. So I think that's where the storytelling becomes important. Do you have this experience within? And I think it's pretty hard. I do this exercise, when I do these things on political economy now, going down this thing, do you know somebody who had their home foreclosed? Do you know somebody who lost a job? Do you know somebody who took a pay cut? And everybody in the room by the end of the 5 questions is standing up. We are all truly in this together. And I think that that's part of, the appeal that we start to make to these groups. Yeah.
I echo that. The woman who was sitting by me, she's from the Church of the Resurrection, and what we realize is our church people are fairly well off, aren't even 1%. And so, but we can easily tell folks that their children, how are their children doing? Well, how do you foresee their children doing? And they all get that. Well, right now, they're not doing so good.
Yeah.
And we don't have any hope of it getting better.
Yeah.
And they're taking care of their extended families in their homes, etc.
Right.
So you don't have to go very far before they feel like to say, and everyone who's standing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that Plato said that, about family and community. Those are common things that most people have and care for in one way or another. And what's been so bad about, what the banks and the corporations have done is they've devastated communities and families, which I think is something that's a shared value, that we all have. So I think there are ways in terms of a lot of different organizations, again, to have these conversations and hear these stories, a slow, arduous process, but one I think well worth undertaking. Yeah.
Well, I think with the economic crash in 2008, that brought people closer together because it's getting more and more to into everybody's home. And it's in the news, and it's so it's easier to engage with topical conversations these days. Mm-hmm. Because everybody's experiencing, on some level, the economic pain that comes with entering into a paradigm shift, which is where we're at.
No, I think that's why you guys have been so effective. You were able to take a common experience that people had, to put a name on it, to frame it, to take it out into the streets and put it right up there for everyone to see. And so I think we got to remember we got a great story to tell. We got a great message, and to bring other folks on.
Riding the wave.
Yeah. And making some new ones as well. So again, I just want to suggest, I won't belabor this, but I think that, we talked about the Rotary, we talked about the church. I'm really glad to hear it. I think it's great that you're trying to reach out beyond the usual suspects. Those are part of the conversation. But I think the extent to which you think about these sorts of things in advance, you do your research on the potential ally, you approach it as a relationship, that those things are all extremely important in terms of developing the sense of trust, mutual respect, that then you can ride, ride that wave even further. So I just want to, so those are, I think, in terms of making these appeal, some of the things I think that are most important to keep in mind. Let me close. I just wanted to say a few words about recruitment and volunteers. I just have, just duties in each direction. So I just have a couple. Let me just take one of myself so it's not going to refer to. These are just a couple of things. These are specifically kind of around a union approach to volunteers and participation. But I just wanted to spend a minute talking about these. Lauren had asked me to say a few words about this, and also in terms of kind of how you track recruitment and volunteers. Because, and in fact, do you guys have a database already of people that have in one way or another participated with Occupy? Yeah.
We have a database of volunteers that sign up on our website.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
To participate in volunteer activities.
Yeah. One of the things I just found in terms of doing coalition work was, and this may be something you do already, but if you look on the back of this green sheet, one form or another of something like a member mobilization form, I think is really useful, particularly if you're going out and doing speaking engagements, you're talking to organizations or whatever. I mean, this is a little old school. I must admit, I'm a little old school on this stuff. Although I really do give social media its due. But I am big on one-on-one, and I am big at certain points of asking people to actually sign something. But to give people a sense of options when you're out there speaking and you give them a chance to volunteer, to sign up, and to give them a range of things that they're willing to do. And then I think the key after that is keeping in touch with these people on a consistent basis. I mean, just the basic rule of all this stuff is if you have a contact, nurture it, water it, like a plant, watch it. Don't let it lapse, because somebody may be hot at a given moment, and the more that they know that it was serious. I mean, to me, the United Farm Workers did something for me 40 years ago that made an impression on me that I never forgot, because I had worked at all kinds of anti-war groups. They were sort of loosely organized. You came, you didn't come, whatever. We went to a farm worker thing, and 2 days later somebody called and invited me to do something. And I just was really struck by that they took the time to actually sit and make a phone call to me after they had met me 2 days earlier. These people are serious. And I went out and never stopped. So I think that sort of stuff in terms of nurturing contacts is really, really important. I also just have this circle of volunteer recruitment and participation. This is kind of a union thing, but I think it's a sort of useful way to think about volunteering. That there's a sort of, you think about it as a set of ripples or concentric circles, and there's a core in the middle that'll do almost everything, and you go out from there in terms of people that'll do a little bit less, a little bit less. And I think the approach is that it's really good that we have a lot of different people doing a lot of different things, but if we can move them from the outside of the circle to the inside over time, if you start off doing this, maybe we can move them up to doing this. So maybe eventually the person that signed a petition might be a person to come to a rally. And eventually the person that came to a rally might actually be willing to do a sit-in, because they might see that some of those actions aren't as effective as they wanted them to be. So it's kind of a step-by-step thing in terms of greater levels of commitment to activism. Yeah.
I'm curious, what ideas or information do you have for me to help me learn, and us, learn how to take people from, this circle willing to buy pledge cards or willing to turn up big events to actually being an active, passionate volunteer.
Yeah. There's no real magic formula, I mean, I think it's a thing that, it's political education. I mean, it's really political education. I mean, let me ask you, how many of you before Occupy have been politically active?
Broadly defined.
Yeah, broadly defined. For was this your first political activity?
I voted before.
Okay. we put that out here on the but that's the whole thing is that I think that when you see people, first it's just what you see. I think people are starting to see something that they said, this is something different. And I think it's the kind of thing over time that people begin to just think about their role in the world, their chance to actually be an agent or a vehicle of change. And, okay, we signed the petition, that was good, but it didn't get us what we wanted. Would you be willing to come out and put your body out here to do this, in a given way, because we need more pressure. And if this didn't work, and the issue is so burning, and not everybody will go there. I mean, not everybody goes there. People come from the outside of the circle to the inside at different paces of speed and everything. But I think it's a sense that if they see it's a serious movement, and they see that to make change, certain types of things are needed. And some people, voting is important, but voting is necessary but not sufficient. That political change alone won't be made by voting. There's other things. And I actually say the union movement, I think, actually needs to learn about that. We've had that conversation. It's not just every 4 years we go out and work for X candidate. Or if you work for X candidate, you got to keep the damn pressure on afterwards in terms of holding their feet to the fire So, again, I think there are multiple roles for people. We have to take people where they're at and where they're beginning and kind of move them forward through activity and conversation. Do you guys debrief your events after you do them? I mean, you have to just sit down and talk about what happened and...
Over with.
Okay. Sometimes good. You know. I wouldn't recommend making major political decisions. I've been there and done that too. But in all seriousness, I lost my train. Debriefing. Yeah. I mean, I think that what's useful too is that when you have actions and you talk about what happened, you know, then it's a way for people to process their experience. I mean, you know, for example, I mean, what did the police do on this particular occasion? How did the speakers function? How did our message get out? How did the media report it? So it's all part, I think, of a broader type of political education, and I think people over time can really, you know, move more deeply into that.
Also, I think Occupy did bring out a lot of new activists. It was interesting to see how people would apply skills that came from entirely different fields so well into activism, and people that came from the business world or from science, or they would take the same strategies and tactics that made them successful in that and apply it. And I think that was actually a really beneficial thing because it was this kind of crossbreed of different ways of approaching problem solving. I think like there were a lot of people that were really effective that would keep saying, "Oh, I don't know what I'm doing," because I haven't been a political activist. I'd be looking at it like, "Yeah, you do," in a different language, in a different way.
How do you know when to let someone off the hook? Or, you know, sometimes it feels a little bit like a sales thing, and you really are trying to help people move in a good direction, right? And there's all these, like, very nice steps we can offer them. And have you ever had people, no doubt you have, who said, whatever, they're not looking for the
Well, it's one of those things that we're in the business of rejection at some level. I mean, you know, there are going to be people who, you know, won't go along with you. You know, who, you know, they won't, you know, you call them up 10 times for a date, they're not going to go out with you, you know, whatever. You know, that happens. We're never going to get, you know, 100%. But I think what a lot of people are really wrestling with now is how do we grow a movement to scale? The communications workers, for example, I think are very progressive and forward-looking in a union that helped found Jobs with Justice and ESG and all of that. They have this term now they're using, we need to get to 50 million. We need 50 million people that are engaged in some way to get to a level of scale where we can really begin to influence, you know, the political and economic process. I mean, it's a huge, you know, obviously a huge undertaking, but that doesn't mean that we have to, you know, have every person, and not every person has to be involved at the level of intensity as every other person. But I think part of it, one of the basic things I, you know, in early organizing, somebody said to me was, you know, one of our problems is that we actually, in the union movement, we didn't even ask people. And so we, you know, we would say until you really ask somebody, you know, it's pretty hard to say that, you know, you've done your job, because we didn't really offer people opportunities on a range of, you know, of options to actually do things. So I think that that's just something we kind of have to accept with it. But I think that more and more people, as they see something exciting and vibrant and that can make a difference in their lives, well, you know, you've already proved that. I mean, you know, Occupy started off as, you know, people in New York, and the rest is history, you know. And I'm looking forward to Act 2 or 3 or whatever, I don't know what number we want to put on it, in a long playing drama.
I believe it's important to, from my very limited experience, to sometimes you have to reach people with rational arguments and reason, and oftentimes you have to reach people with emotional arguments. And from your experience, I definitely believe both are necessary, but from your experience, which one seems to motivate A, more people, or B, motivate people faster?
Yeah, and I think on one of these sheets, you know, there was something here about why people volunteer for political action. And again, there's a range of reasons why, you know, people do come to this. Some people, you know, ideology, some people it's a social camaraderie, some people it's recognition. There's a range of reasons, but I guess for me, it always started off with values. to me, it's always, you know, there's certain basic things, I don't know whether you learned them in your family, you learned them in your church, you learned them from your, from somebody who was in a union, you learned them from somebody in a nonprofit, whatever it was, there were certain types of values that you believed in. You know, and then they're really, I mean, it may sound a little corny, but I mean, you believed in honesty, you believed in integrity, you believed in solidarity, you believed in an injury to one was an injury to all, you believed in ethical behavior, you believed in giving back. I mean, all those types of things, I think, and the political right is really good at this. I mean, you know,
Especially appealing to emotions.
yeah, emotions, but also but values. I mean, you know, you hear, I mean, just, you know, I mean, it's no big secret, right? Listen to their language, and they're always talking explicitly about values. And, you know, we can question, do they really believe it? Is it just subterfuge? Is it phony and all of that? But my bottom line is that they do it, and it's been very effective because it grabs people, I think, in an emotional way, but it gets to that's the starting point. And then I think when you come behind the values with the facts, you know, that this is not the type of world, this is not what democracy looks like. You know, we believe in that. That's a fundamental American value, a fundamental value we all feel. You're distorting our country, our democracy, our communities, our families, and here factually, you know, then that's when I come in with the facts. You know, well, here's the 99% and 1%. Here's the 1/10 of the 1%. The thing that I think a lot of people on the left and liberals have made the mistake with is that they start off with facts. Here's our 10-point, that's why I love that you guys didn't have a 10-point program. You know, you weren't overwhelming people with facts. You were out there saying, here's our values, here's what we believe. That's why you in a way that no one else did, you galvanized people because you implicitly understood that. The facts came afterwards. I mean, people just glaze over with the damn facts, plus it's your facts versus my facts. You know, so I like to start off with the values, and then the architecture is you put the facts overlay them on the values, but then you've already triggered something in people's mind in terms of how you frame the issue.
When you say, though, that on both sides, I mean, it stems from values. When the populist movement comes to the surface, it's because they have had enough, you know, and it's coming from a very strong emotional base, and, you know, and it's an accumulation of information to where we get to that point where we're ready to act.
I look at the union movement, which I know best, and I've always said, you know, people don't fight that hard for a nickel or a dime or whatever an hour. What they really fight hard for is respect and dignity. You know, the money may have some relationship to that, but when we were organizing, I was a union organizer, it was always not so much, I mean, people wanted better wages and benefits, but the main thing was they were being disrespected, they were not being treated fairly with dignity, there was favoritism, it was all that sort of stuff that really got at you as a human being in terms of what you thought was right and wrong at the most basic level. You know, that's where I think the best organizing has always stemmed from, and I think always will. I just really want to thank you for the opportunity to talk to you. Again, if there's any further ways, you know, we could be a help to you, we really, you know, we believe in what you're doing. And particularly with some of the groups up here, I might be able to be helpful because I've got some groups in some of them.
Talk to you again soon. So before everybody rolls, as most of you guys know, Mary has kind of been taking the lead on our volunteer coordination within the OE movement, and she would like a couple minutes of your time.
Just to let you know how that's getting organized. If you've got a friend and they're interested in plugging in and they don't know what they want to do, the website. Go to the website, it says get involved. And under get involved is volunteers, and it lists all the different kinds of things we're doing in the committees. And then there's a list for them to sign up, and then it goes to a database, and we have people following up with those folks. And so if they're saying that they're interested in fundraising, we're connecting them right away to the fundraising committee. Okay, so we're trying to do all that. The other piece is Carla's idea, and that was a buddy list, a way to keep volunteers in once they start coming in, but don't quite know where to plug in, or everybody looks so friendly they don't know how to fit in. Look, what I like to just pass this around. If you're interested in buddying up with a new volunteer, and just kind of, you know, be real friendly to them the first couple of times you see them, maybe you make a lifelong friend from it. But just as a way to make that connection. So if you want to sign up for that, here's the buddy list, sign your name up on that. And the top is, if your occupation, education, you're not getting an email today, it means you're not on the list. So please get on the list so that you will receive emails in the future for occupation education. So the top is to sign up for the occupation education, down here is the buddy list, put your name and a contact number. I think that's it. Next week, we got action planning, Kim Marks, so it should be really good, really down and dirty looking at how to plan action.